Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center for Recovery. I'm really happy today to be here with Dan Major. He's going to tell us about his work and how he got to the point, the kind of work that he's doing and how it ties into addiction and the kind of recovery that we're talking about here in this summit, which is much more than abstinence. It's really a whole healing and really grounded. So, Dan, why don't you go ahead and just tell us a bit about how you got to here?
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you again for having me here in this forum. It's really an honor to be here, and quite fortuitous. As we talked a little bit about having clinicians and folks doing healing work with similar visions and perspectives on what facilitates healing, especially as it relates to addiction recovery, is such an important wave of energy, effectively. My perspective on recovery in the big picture is that it's a process of ongoing learning, growth, and healing. And that abstinence in the best possible and healthiest version is an important part of that. But as you suggest, recovery is a process that goes far beyond abstinence. Abstinence is only a beginning, only a foundation, and the quality, depth, and richness of a person's recovery turns on what happens once they stop using alcohol or other drugs, or their obsessive compulsive involvement in emotionally avoidant behaviors. The full range of so-called process addictions, be it gambling, sex, food, shopping, spending, exercise, work, internet, social media, gaming, what have you. So I come to my current status through a long and winding road. I got my MSW in 1987 and began practicing in addiction treatment about 1989. And most of a 20-year postmaster's career, actually my career is 35, going on my postmaster's career is 32 years at this point. But prior to an addiction mandated hiatus, I had 20 years of treatment 20 years of experience in addiction treatment, primarily at senior management levels as clinical director, vice president of counseling services in a wide variety of behavioral health settings, both outpatient and inpatient, including in a hospital-based detox and inpatient treatment program in New York, about 30 miles northwest of New York City. While I had always, as a child of the 70s, more so than the 60s in terms of when I really came of age, I had been using alcohol and other drugs myself, off and on, since I was late latency age, even pre-adolescence. And I walked a careful and conscious tightrope for a very long time, graduating college with honors, doing my MSW program, moving up the career ladder. And at a certain point, I became afflicted with a chronic pain condition, 2 herniated discs in my lumbar spine. And so unwittingly, I became a pioneer in the opioid epidemic in the US. And so I was diagnosed in 1998 and began to be prescribed um, heavy-duty opioid narcotic medications uh, in the aftermath of the recent change in prescribing paradigm and regulations promulgated by the CDC and encouraged by the pharmaceutical industry and doctors who were willing to go along for that ride. You know, in most cases, I believe they were well-intentioned, but at minimum misguided, wanting to believe that in fact somehow long-term prescription opioid medications could be effective for chronic pain, when the only real research that substantiated the efficacy of long-term use of opioids related to terminal illness, which obviously has a termination point, and pain for cancer. And what I found was that over the course of 8 years of taking those medications every day, I became increasingly not just dependent upon them, but hopelessly addicted. And it got to the point after again walking this interesting tightrope and living a bit of a double life for over 20 years. I began to experience significant consequences at work for the very first time, and there were issues with my marriage as well. And finally, even though it was something that I had avoided for a long time because my professional knowledge and awareness actually helped to fuel my various defense mechanisms, my denial and minimization related to the reality that I was an addict, and obscured willingness to take the necessary steps to do something constructive with reference to it. It got to the point that I couldn't deny it to myself or anyone else, and needed to have the experience of being on the other side of the desk, so to say. And
No,
you know,
that's
so
just to kind of pause there. My goodness, that must have been such a difficult. I mean, I can see why you wouldn't want to go, oh, I'm addicted, I need some help. That there would be such a process of coming to terms with that, and other people being involved in it too. And yeah,
it
wow.
was it was horrifying and terrifying, and the shame and guilt connected to it was really profound.
Right.
Um, but
Mm.
it got to the point where that was one of the very few options left. Another one being a legacy that I wasn't willing to leave to my then adolescent kids, because as we
Wow.
know, the number one risk factor for suicide is having a close relative who successfully suicides, but more so than any other level of relative, having a parent.
Wow.
But it got to that place where it was
Mm.
kind of either or, and it was horrifying, but it was fascinating. When I got to treatment, and I ended up at a treatment program that did co-occurring addiction and chronic pain, one of the few in the country in late 2006 at
Mm.
that point. And having to admit in a group setting, introduce myself, hi, I'm Dan and I'm an addict, was both terrifying and liberating in a way that I never would have anticipated. Just being able to speak the truth of that reality without having to continue to hide it in an increasingly desperate, anxiety and fear-driven sort of way.
Right.
So
Mm.
because I was not a young person at the time, uh, I embraced treatment and recovery with an attitude of, I only want to do this once. I'm not going to put myself or those closest to me through this again. So I became involved with the 12-step program that I'm still actively involved in, and fascinatingly, my professional knowledge, experience, and skill transitioned from an impediment to my recovery and healing in connection with it to really a wonderful resource, where I was able to have a deeper and different understanding and perspective for the processes that I needed to go through and engage in. And also I had, I learned how to meditate when I was 16 years old. And I started with transcendental meditation. And even though there were a small handful of years where my practice wasn't regular, basically I've been doing it to this point for about 40 years on a daily basis. And even on the tail end of my active addiction, I was meditating on a daily basis. Now, obviously, that didn't get me clean or serve as a mitigating factor in the problems that I experienced. But again, coming out of treatment and embracing recovery, it became part of my overall recovery practice. And part of that was continuing to add various mindfulness related practices to this process of understanding, learning, growth, and healing at multiple levels. So one of the consequences of the tail end of my active addiction, I gave up licenses in clinical social work and alcohol and drug counseling in Arizona, where I was living at the time. And when I had 2 years clean, I was able to begin work as the senior staff writer at a small publishing company in Las Vegas that focused on topics related to wellness, behavioral health, and addiction recovery specifically. And it was through that experience that I had the opportunity to write 2 books of my own and have them published. The first is Some Assembly Required: A Balanced Approach to Recovery from Addiction and Chronic Pain, which is partly my story. It's mixed genre. It's about a third memoir, and I tell my story in all of its exquisite and gory detail, making the determination that if I was going to tell it, it had to be complete. But way beyond that, it includes a great deal of psychoeducational content pertaining to the dynamics of addiction and its progression, as well as chronic pain, and presents a multi-dimensional approach to recovery from those as co-occurring challenges. And then my second book is Roots and Wings: Mindful Parenting in Recovery, which is really a next level book for me. But I also think in the field, insofar as there's almost no literature written for parents in recovery, and although that's the niche for this particular book, and there are chapters that are specific to parents who are in recovery, the vast majority of the content is applicable to all parents. And one of the things that I aspired to do with it was to present clear and easily digestible information on what mindfulness is, with meditation as a subset of the full range of mindfulness practices, along with a tremendous amount of material, step-by-step, user-friendly material on meditation and different forms of meditation, as well as all sorts of different mindfulness practices, which have as their heart, and currently I'm the executive director of the Vance Johnson Recovery Center here in Las Vegas, which is a new inpatient treatment center where we'll do medically managed detox, as well as inpatient and residential treatment. And one of the things that we'll be doing as a highlight is a lot of work related to mindfulness and meditation, because, and this is consistent with conceptualizing radical recovery, recovery 2.0 or past that, 2.5. So much of the process, to me, has to do with the conscious awareness of where our internal processes begin to go off course in ways that are less healthy, in ways that don't serve us well, where our thinking begins to go astray, telling us various creative stories, pulling us back into the past, pushing us into the future, and effectively providing this waterfall of thoughts and images, which often have very little, if anything, to do with life in the here and now, with this moment right here. And then those thoughts tend to drive emotions, which also can become very easily unbalanced as we get caught up in anxiety or fear about what might happen, frustration, anxiety, or resentment about what happened in the past, or what we think is going to happen next. These conversations that we have with other people in our minds, for example. And for those of us with chronic pain or other challenges, that becomes a vicious circle, which tends to gas up physical discomfort and pain as well. And then obviously, all of that contributes to a high degree of spiritual imbalance. So what I wanted to present in both books, but especially Roots and Wings, and what is going to form the basis of the treatment program where I am now, and this is the foundation of my own recovery, as well as the framing of it, is developing the conscious awareness to know what our processes are, to be able to observe, to witness my thinking, and to be able, as opposed to being an actor in those thoughts, where I can come to the conscious awareness in this moment right now. Wow, my mind is spinning some crazy stories.
Mm-hmm.
And even that simple awareness, coming to that place of observation or witnessing, provides this essential separation, and where we come to, basically we wake up from the slumber of unconscious awareness and realize I am not my thoughts. I am simply thinking my thoughts. And then so developing the skills to do that, along with those of emotional regulation and distress tolerance, where I can effectively, even when I'm experiencing pain. And we know that emotional and physical pain tend to go together hand in glove. They activate each other continuously.
Mm-hmm.
But go
so
ahead.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of two major pathways to addiction. So on the one hand, you were enjoying alcohol and other drugs in the 70s. And then on the other hand, you had a pain condition for which you were prescribed an addictive substance, opioids. So in your experience, do most people that come through that second path, do they also have childhood developmental trauma? Is that more on the like, what's your experience with the trauma piece with this as it drives addiction? And as we have to kind of heal trauma in order to, kind of lessen one of the drivers of addiction so that we have a better chance at recovery. What's your experience with that?
Well, I think trauma underlies the vast majority of challenges related to addiction, but all sorts of other biopsychosocial challenges as well. And one of the things we know from a tremendous amount of research and the literature that it's generated in the last number of years is that trauma comes in many different forms. And it's not just the so-called big T traumas, but the small T traumas, those repetitive experiences of failure in interactions between children and primary caregivers, parents most notably, but all forms of primary caregivers, including teachers, sometimes coaches and other important adults. But when children experience the adults that they're dependent upon, as sometimes there's more overt abuse and neglect, including that which is addiction driven on the part of those adults. But sometimes they're just these mini or even micro failures of present-centeredness, of emotional availability that create fissures in the attachment process, fissures in the process of normalizing and validating the experience of children and young people. And when they experience the adults that they're dependent upon, the people that are most important in their lives, as not being there for them, even in these circumstances where the adults simply aren't paying close enough attention because they're involved in other stuff. Maybe they have no real awareness of the essential importance of connecting with their kids on these levels. Maybe they're stressed out at work. Maybe they have their own health challenges. Maybe there are challenges with other family members or friends. There was life on life's terms, especially now with 24/7 connectivity, spreads everyone remarkably thin. But when kids experience the adults that they're dependent upon as not being there for them in the way that they need, and this goes back to object relations theory and the pioneering work of D.W. Winnicott, the British pediatrician turned psychoanalyst, who described the challenges related to providing a holding environment and good enough parenting that Bruno Bettelheim then built on. But kids learn that there's something wrong with them when they have these experiences. That if there weren't something wrong with them, the people who I love and who I'm dependent upon would be there in a more connected, more responsive sort of way. And so these bricks in the wall of poor self-image, of impaired self-image, self-worth, and self-esteem begin to form. And then if you add like more, so to say, significant episodic trauma on top of that, verbal or emotional abuse, physical abuse, neglect, parents not being there for them, sexual abuse, or violent crime, and the more conventional forms that mainstream understanding of trauma tends to take. What we're talking about is a profound wounding of the psyche. And so I think the healing process has to normalize and validate the reality that many more people than not have been traumatized in these ways, and so some of the core characteristics of active addiction, in my experience, involve a sense of not fitting in, of not being good enough or not being enough, of being of emotional sort of hypersensitivity, having very finely tuned emotions where things may affect them, result in higher levels of challenging or uncomfortable emotions than other folks potentially, and this sense of internal emptiness, and hence the need to fill it up and to turn down the volume of this emotional hypersensitivity and facilitate a sense of connectedness and of fitting in. And alcohol and other drugs, along with other activities, can serve that purpose, but all forms of emotional avoidance ultimately backfire because they can work for a short period of time. They provide this sense of relief and temporary respite from the onslaught of that discomfort, of that pain. But invariably, the sources of the discomfort and pain, including when the etiology is related to traumas, obviously don't go anywhere. That continues, and it's waiting when the being under the influence of whatever it is begins to wear off, and then you combine it with the increased discomfort of the withdrawal syndrome, including the immediate micro withdrawal of coming down from whatever it is. And then in addition to that, you have the consequences of the progressive addictive process, all of which, basically result in addiction being a shortcut, which leads to a dead end. Sometimes it takes people a lot longer to get to that dead end, as it did with me, but eventually they get there. And so one of the books I had the privilege of editing when I was the senior staff writer at this publishing company a few years ago was by a physician named Jason Powers, who is also in recovery himself, and it's called When the Servant Becomes the Master.
Mm-hmm.
The alcohol and other drugs and other obsessive compulsive behaviors, they start out serving us. They serve a certain purpose, but if we use or involve ourselves with them long enough, eventually that transforms and resulting in, due to the changes in neurochemistry and neuroanatomy, we end up at the mercy of those processes, caught in the grip of obsessive thinking, compulsive behavior, and this deep narcissistic self-centeredness, because we're afflicted with tunnel vision, and our worlds get progressively smaller and smaller and smaller, revolving around the need to get whatever the substance or behavior is, our involvement in using it, and then recovering from the withdrawal and setting off that cycle all over again. And part of that process when results in, so as we know, trauma changes neurochemistry and anatomy such that, there's this dramatic infusion of cortisol, the stress hormone, into the nervous system, and people's central nervous systems get stuck in the mode of fight, flight, and freeze out of survival. Right. And it's kind of like a smoke detector that gets stuck in the on position. It's wearying and exhausting, but people don't know what to do. in connection with it. And this approach to recovery that we're talking about, and this is absolutely facilitated by processes like EMDR, but also all manner of mindfulness-based practices, including meditation, to help people again develop the conscious awareness of where their nervous system is at, that it's stuck in the stress response where the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is activated, and to help them shift out of that and turn on the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, which is the one that's active and dominant in rest, relaxation, and self-calming. And obviously, this is a very gradual process. And I've been doing this for many years. And it's the only thing I'm perfect at with reference to it is being perfectly imperfect.
Right. So, so your recovery center that you're just setting up here is different than maybe a traditional one. I think a lot of recovery centers now are starting to really see the benefits of working with the nervous system and mindfulness and things. But can you just maybe highlight what would people be doing when they come to your center as compared to maybe a more traditional 12-step only? Do you work with trauma with people? Do you work with their nervous systems right away? Like, what would the experience be like?
Everything that we do is trauma informed.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of psychoeducation in connection with that. There's a lot of working with people in the moment. What's going on right now, and everyone here is part of the therapeutic process, whether they're the receptionist, the maintenance person, the recovery support tech staff that has the line responsibility for supervising and interacting with patients, the housekeeping staff, all the way up to the clinical staff, including myself, the nurses, of course, and any of the other administrators. But we have 2 mindfulness meditation focus groups every day. And so for instance, those processes, that education and practice, and it's about learning, but practice. So there's going to be a ton of practice here, because in my experience, and this goes back to a childhood filled with competitive sports, the only way to get better at anything, no matter what it is, whether it's sports, gardening, cooking, working on cars, recovery, mindfulness, whatever it might be, learn the techniques that work for us, that which is effective for us, and practice them with persistence and dedication, even when we don't feel like it. And it starts with intentional breathing. So often, especially when people are in that, when they're stuck in the mode of the sympathetic division of their nervous system, fight, flight, and freeze, their breathing is incredibly rapid and shallow. And often, in addition to that, people are holding their breath
Right. I find that too.
for nanoseconds, for tiny periods of time. And of course, what that means is that there's less oxygen getting into their bloodstream, into their lungs, to their brain, to their vital organs, and so forth. And that only increases the stress and the anxiety that they're experiencing. So to effectively sabotage that process through conscious awareness and help people learn and practice how to breathe intentionally is, as simple as it is a huge intervention in and of itself. And then of course, conscious attention to the breath is really the foundation of many mindfulness practices, including meditation. But ultimately, to me, it's about, healing the pain as much as we can is where it's at. However, given that that's a lifelong process, my personal approach to recovery, and that which we're going to evidence here at Vance Johnson Recovery Center, is helping people develop the awareness and learn the skills to be able to greet their discomfort and pain, whatever form it may be, to notice it, to greet it, to observe it, and be present with it, even if it's uncomfortable, even if they do not like it, to allow it to simply be, and in turn make space for it, and then to hold it and to ultimately make peace with it to the extent that they're capable of, in contrast to fighting against it because they don't like it. Because who wants to be uncomfortable? Who wants to be in pain? That would be, that would be silly. But the reality is, life on its own terms throws no small amount of discomfort and pain in all of its manifestations at everyone, normally and naturally, to say nothing of folks who've experienced challenges related to significant trauma and addiction. And as Carl Jung emphasized, so much of the healing process is really about learning how to accept and make peace with those parts of ourselves and our experience that we struggle with, those parts of ourselves and our experience that we don't like, perhaps deeply dislike, but are inevitably part of our experience. And so to come to terms with them and simply learn how to make peace with them to the best of our ability, rather than bang our head against the wall of them with all of the problems that creates, all of the forms of avoidance, including the use of alcohol and other drugs, is really one of the most critical pathways to health and to healing, to learn how to live a whole, healthy, and healed life.
Right. One thing that I've noticed, I teach meditation and have for many years. And one thing I noticed that people often say is, my mind was a lot better before I started meditating, because now they're becoming so aware of all of the compulsions and the catastrophic thinking and all of that was always there, but they weren't really kind of aware of it. And then with the way trauma is stored in our body, and we use all of these addictions, processes, and substances to distract ourselves from that and to not have to feel that. So can you talk a little bit about that process of or maybe have an example of someone you're thinking of or yourself? How do we open to that when we know it's going to be difficult? We've always managed it in this way through our addictions, and now we're expected to actually be really present with it. What's that process like for you?
It starts with an awareness that it's going to be difficult, that this is going to be a challenge, that it's perhaps a sea change in how we respond to our experience, both internal and external. And it's the difference, as you alluded to, between reacting unconsciously, habitually, and automatically to our experience, both internal and external, and being aware of it so that we can respond consciously, intentionally, and much more skillfully, where we have a choice as to how to respond. And although there's a quote that's attributed to Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning that's incredibly famous, but when I went to get permission to use it from the Viktor Frankl Society, the keeper of his legacy, for in some assembly required, I was informed that quote, that he never actually said those words, although he articulated words very similar. But you know the quote. It's that it talks about his experience in the Nazi death camps, and they could take everything away from him. They could take away his family, his food, his health, his livelihood, his practice. They could take away his life. But the one thing they couldn't take away from him was his ability to choose how to respond in the moment. That between stimulus, what happens to us, and response, what we do with what happens to us, is a space. And within that space lies our freedom. So that's the one thing the Nazis could not take away from him. And it's such an exquisite metaphor, but it requires tremendous effort. It requires tremendous work. And the only way to make meaningful life change in any form is to be able to mobilize strength and courage, to know that it's going to be difficult, to find ways to accept and work through that, to struggle through that, to do it even when we don't feel like it, with as much self-kindness, as much self-compassion and forgiveness as we can mobilize. And that's absolutely part of the process as well. So, and we normalize and validate the difficulty, and encourage the strength and the courage, and also we draw on people's past experience, using that as a metaphor for the process of learning, growth, and healing, particularly in reference to recovery, because everyone, no matter how desperate or challenged their circumstances, no matter whether they're homeless and destitute, or they've had a degree of much more conventional success in their lives, everyone has had experiences where they've done certain things well, where they've been skillful or successful. And one of the keys to both treatment and the recovery process is for the professionals to endeavor to do the work necessary to help clients, or the people we work with, identify those previous experiences of resources, strengths, and skill, and then to generalize it, to be able to generalize it to the challenges at hand, and bring those internal resources and strengths to bear. Because if they didn't have them, they wouldn't have had a degree of success and skill in these other areas previously. So they're there, even though in my experience, the vast majority of the time, they've never looked at them that way. They may not have even been consciously aware of them until we engaged in that exploration, that excavation, if you will. But metaphor is such an exquisite way of helping people connect their past experience with the work ahead and all of the challenges that it requires. But as we know, people do that, as difficult as it is, as intimidating as it can be, people do it all the time.
Right, right.
And related, just a brief piece on the people you teach meditation to, talking about how their minds were better beforehand. It's fascinating. Again, I've been meditating on a daily basis, literally, for 40 years, and the quality, depth of my morning meditation practice varies tremendously.
Right.
There are days when it's exquisite, it's deep, and it's rich, and I'm right there, and my mind is very quiet. Sometimes I even see colors. And other days where the waterfall of thoughts is pretty continuous, and I'm you know, very regularly, essentially, even during meditation, waking up to the conscious realization, oh, I was thinking again. Oh, and just, but that, and early in my practice, I was very self-critical. Oh, I'm doing it wrong. I'm screwing up, what have you, and so forth. And one of the things I've learned is how to practice self-compassion and self-forgiveness, how to be kind to myself in connection with that. So now it's just an awakening. It's no big deal. Okay, let's go back to the focus of this particular practice today.
Right. So, how do you manage pain, physical pain without opioids,
Oh,
like
that's
yourself and other people?
that's a wonderful question, and that's one of the things that we're going to do here as well, because this is something that I have a tremendous amount of experience in, both personal and professional.
Hmm.
Um, and I still have chronic pain. I still have herniated discs at the L5 and S1 vertebrae, and surgery is always an option, but that's not something I'm interested in. So what I found is that there are no magic bullets, there are no quick fixes.
Kind of
And
like with emotional pain. It's a
exactly,
process that takes time. Yeah.
exactly. And as we mentioned earlier, physical and emotional pain go together in a way that's pretty seamless. They activate each other continuously. The more physical pain we have, the more likely we are to feel anxiety, frustration, sadness, depression, anger, sometimes guilt and shame, depending upon our functioning. Um, and the more I feel any of those emotions, if I'm not mindful about it, the more physical pain I'm likely to experience, because it just increases overall discomfort and adds to the injection of cortisol into the nervous system and the stress response. So my approach is twofold. I engage in say a dozen different practices that help me turn down the volume of the pain and the discomfort that I experience. And most of the time it's normal, like normal pain for me at this point, whereas previously it was still horrible. It was unfair. Why is this happening to
Wow.
me? I can't stand it. Oh, and by the way, I need more Percocet, or I need to up the dose of my fentanyl patch, or whatever it happened to be. um,
Mm.
and stress just adds to that as well.
It
But
does.
now it's like, the normal pain, it's no fun, but it's not a big deal. There's no catastrophizing of it. I have a high level of acceptance. And that's the second piece, to accept and work with the pain that's left over
Wow.
with as much grace as I can mobilize
Hmm.
on any given day. And it's a moving target. Rather than so when professionals, medical and ancillary, talk to patients about eliminating the pain, like opioids are pain. They're known as painkillers. When pain becomes chronic, it's exceedingly rare it's going to be cured. It's going to be eliminated. So to give up the fantasy that we're going to be pain free,
Oh,
that's a significant loss, and mourning it is certainly appropriate. But coming to terms with it is really critical, because then we're prepared for the reality of what is, which is what mindfulness is at its essence.
it's
And
being with what is. Yeah.
yeah, and so my focus is on is on having as much as high a level of function as I can and as high a level of quality of life as I can, in spite of whatever pain I may be experiencing. And in connection with that, I play tennis often, and I hike very regularly, including or most frequently in the high elevation mountain wilderness just north and west of Las Vegas,
Wow.
where regularly I will go up to 10,000 feet.
Wow.
And I have to push myself. It isn't easy, and in some cases, I know there's going to be a trade-off in a higher level of discomfort or pain. But it's a balancing act. I'm willing to endure that, especially when I know that it's more usual. It's more within normal range for me, in order to have those experiences and participate in those activities
Right.
that bring that much more meaning and joy into my life.
Right. Right. Good answer. Yeah, when we're just facing right in front of us either our past or something going on in our body or emotions that are so difficult, there is a surrender there. We have to just kind of acknowledge this is what it is. And
Yeah,
that's a big part
and
of it.
that there are times when it is simply difficult,
Right.
and that's okay. And we can learn how to give ourselves a break,
Right.
including simply to rest at
Yeah.
times, to
Yeah.
be to be conservative with our time and our energy, and
Yeah.
what and with whom we spend it on. That's
Mhm.
a really big deal, and that's an important important part, excuse me, of the healing and recovery process as well.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Hmm. Well, we're almost at the end of our time. The time goes so fast when we're talking about this. How would people get a hold of you? So your books. Do you want to mention the books again, and also your website and that kind of thing, so people could get in touch?
Sure. The books are Some Assembly Required, a
Mm.
balanced approach to healing or to recovery, excuse me, from addiction and chronic pain, and Roots and Wings, Mindful Parenting in Recovery. And I've also, for the last 6 years, since shortly after the first book came out, I've been privileged to write a blog for Psychology Today, which is the same name as the main title of the first book, Some Assembly Required. And
Oh,
then my own website, which I don't spend as much time on as I should, but there's a lot of helpful information there, including a number of videos that I've done speaking specifically to various issues connected to addiction and chronic pain as co-occurring challenges, is Mindful Healing, one word, for life.com.
mindful healing
Mindful
for life.
Healing for life.com.
Okay, I'll put all of those up on the screen so people can see them. Right.
Great, thank you,
Yeah.
Lynn.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. It's been really interesting to talk about this and to hear your perspective. And like we talked about at the beginning, there's a lot of alignment here. And I think it's wonderful that we're not so much in that kind of I got to grit my teeth and get through this, but to really open up to how it actually is to have difficulties in life and to have pain and emotional and physical pain, and how we can be present with that with kindness, and that makes all the difference.
Absolutely. And even, those times where we find ourselves reflexively and automatically clenching our fists and gritting our teeth, to use that experience as a signal for more conscious awareness. Oh, my fists are clenched and I'm gritting my teeth. Let me loosen and relax a little bit and pay attention to the quality of my breathing right now. And when we do that, it instantly begins to shift the activity of our nervous system from stress to a higher level of relaxation. And whenever we can do that, it's an important part of the healing process. It adds to and it deepens that. And the more we can remind ourselves, as well as those that we work with, of that experience and the ways in which small but really meaningful shifts in our awareness and our experience are possible, the more likely it is that we and the folks that we help can begin to progress further in the direction of health and healing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Lynn.
Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center Radical Recovery Summit. We are so excited to bring you the lineup for January 10th to 19th, 2020. Go to radicalrecoverysummit.com to see the new headliners for 2020 and to sign up. You can watch free January 10th to 19th or buy an all-access pass.